Jesus said, "Those who have eyes must see the secret meaning." Ancient seekers knew many teachings attributed to Jesus contain phrases that seem simple at first glance. One of the most mysterious appears when he speaks about those who have eyes but cannot see. For many listeners, these words sounded like a poetic expression, yet early interpreters believed the statement pointed toward something far deeper. They suggested that human perception itself can become clouded over time. When the mind is filled with noise and expectation, truth may stand directly before us and remain unnoticed. Understanding why this happens reveals one of the most profound insights preserved in ancient spiritual wisdom. In several passages preserved within the early tradition surrounding the teachings of Jesus, a striking phrase appears again and again. He speaks of those who have eyes yet do not see, and ears yet do not hear. At first glance, the statement sounds like a poetic observation about human attention, but many early spiritual interpreters believed that these words were meant to describe something deeper about the nature of human perception. According to these interpretations, the human mind is not always able to perceive reality clearly. Over time, layers of expectation, fear, memory, and belief begin to shape the way we see the world. Instead of encountering life directly, people often see only what they already expect to see. In this way, perception slowly becomes filtered through habits of thought. This idea appears frequently in the symbolic language associated with ancient spiritual teachings. The image of blindness does not always refer to the inability of the eyes to function. Instead, it points toward a form of inner limitation. A person may look directly at something meaningful and still fail to recognize its significance. Many early communities that reflected on the teachings of Jesus believed that this condition was one of the central obstacles on the path toward awakening. Wisdom might be present in the world, yet the distracted mind moves past it without recognition. Moments of insight appear, but they are quickly covered again by the constant activity of thought. In T-sense, the phrase about seeing yet not perceiving becomes a description of ordinary human awareness. People live surrounded by meaning, yet their attention rarely rests long enough to notice it. The deeper patterns of life remain hidden, not because they are distant, but because perception has become accustomed to looking only at the surface. For the early seekers who contemplated these teachings, awakening began when this pattern started to change. The mind slowly learned to observe more quietly. Attention became less scattered. In that stillness, perception began to recover a clarity that had been present all along, waiting patiently to be recognized. As these early interpretations continued to develop, many spiritual teachers began to describe the human condition using the image of a veil. According to this symbolic language, the deeper dimensions of reality are not absent from the world. Instead, they are simply hidden beneath layers of distraction and assumption that gradually accumulate within the mind. From childhood onward, individuals learn how to interpret the world through the expectations of the culture around them. Beliefs, habits, and fears slowly form a framework through which every experience is understood. While this framework can help organize daily life, it can also limit perception. Instead of seeing what is truly present, people often see only what fits comfortably within their existing understanding. Within this context, the words attributed to Jesus take on a new level of meaning. When he speaks about eyes that cannot see, he may be pointing toward this subtle veil that forms around awareness. Truth itself does not disappear. It simply becomes difficult to recognize beneath the noise of constant interpretation. Several mystical traditions that reflected on these teachings suggested that awakening begins when the veil of perception starts to thin. This change does not usually arrive as a sudden event. Rather, it unfolds gradually as the mind becomes more attentive and less occupied with its usual patterns of thought. Moments of quiet observation begin to reveal details that were previously overlooked. The seeker may start to notice connections, meanings, and patterns that had always existed but were rarely acknowledged. What once seemed ordinary slowly becomes filled with significance. This process marks the beginning of a deeper form of understanding. Perception begins to move beyond surface appearances and toward the underlying reality that spiritual traditions have attempted to describe for centuries. Imagine beginning your journey with the two most powerful Aramaic words that open everything: a complete guide, correct sound, full meaning, and sacred protocol exists for those who feel the call. Check the pinned comment As awareness continues to expand, another transformation begins to unfold. The opening of perception prepares the mind for something that many early seekers described as illumination, and it is within that moment of illumination that the deeper dimension of spiritual insight begins to appear. As perception begins to clear, many early spiritual interpreters believed that a second transformation slowly emerges within awareness. The first step is the recognition that the mind often sees only fragments of reality. The second step is the gradual awakening of what ancient traditions sometimes described as inner vision. This vision does not belong to the physical eyes. Instead, it refers to the ability of consciousness to perceive meaning beyond the surface of events. In the symbolic language of early mystical teachings, this shift in perception was often described using the image of light. Light represented the moment when confusion begins to dissolve and understanding becomes possible. It did not mean that something entirely new suddenly appeared. Rather, it suggested that what had always been present could finally be recognized. Many spiritual traditions connected to the teachings of Jesus spoke about this illumination as a quiet unfolding within the human spirit. The seeker does not create the light through effort or force. Instead, the light becomes visible when the noise of constant thought begins to soften. As attention grows calmer, awareness becomes capable of noticing a deeper order within life. The ancient world frequently expressed this insight through simple images. A lamp placed in darkness reveals what was already in the room. A sunrise does not create the landscape, but allows it to be seen clearly. In a similar way, illumination within consciousness allows the patterns of existence to become visible. For the early seekers who contemplated these teachings, awakening was never described as acquiring something entirely new. It was understood as remembering what had always been present. When the veil of distraction begins to fade, perception discovers a clarity that had been quietly waiting beneath the surface of everyday awareness. This moment of recognition changes the way a person encounters the world. Events that once seemed random begin to reveal subtle meaning. Experiences that appeared ordinary start to reflect deeper connections. The seeker gradually realizes that understanding does not arise from external information alone, but from the awakening of awareness itself. If you feel drawn to go further, a guide already exists. The two most important Aramaic words, Ephatha plus Enananora, that symbolize the beginning of everything. Correct sound, full meaning, and a sacred protocol for those two words. The door is open. Check the pinned comment. As this illumination grows stronger, another dimension of the teaching becomes visible. The transformation of perception does not end with clarity of mind. It also begins to influence the deeper center of human understanding, which ancient traditions often described as the heart. In the next video, I will reveal another sacred Aramaic word connected to the teachings of Jesus. Within many ancient spiritual traditions, the heart was not viewed merely as the seat of emotion. It was considered the meeting place of perception, intuition, and wisdom. When early seekers reflected on the teachings attributed to Jesus, they often emphasized that awakening involved more than intellectual understanding. It required a transformation of the inner center through which meaning is recognized. As perception begins to awaken and illumination gradually appears, the heart becomes capable of recognizing connections that once remained hidden. Compassion deepens, understanding becomes more natural, and the individual begins to sense the subtle unity that underlies existence. What once appeared as separate and unrelated slowly reveals itself as part of a larger pattern. This transformation does not occur suddenly. Just as light slowly fills the sky before sunrise, awareness gradually learns to see with greater clarity. The mind becomes less dominated by distraction, and attention begins to settle more deeply into the present moment. In that quiet attentiveness, the heart discovers a new way of understanding the world. Many early interpreters of the teachings of Jesus believed that this was the true meaning behind the call to awaken. The transformation of consciousness was never presented as an escape from life. Instead, it was described as the restoration of a deeper way of perceiving reality. The individual begins to experience existence, not as a series of isolated events, but as a living expression of a greater harmony. When this shift occurs, the phrase about having eyes yet not seeing begins to lose its power. Awareness becomes capable of recognizing truth even in the smallest moments. Simple experiences begin to carry significance. Everyday life reveals a depth that had previously remained hidden beneath the surface of routine perception. For the seeker walking this path, Awakening becomes less about searching for distant revelations and more about recognizing what has always been quietly present. The mind learns to observe more patiently. The heart learns to understand more deeply. And through this gradual unfolding, the individual begins to rediscover the clarity that ancient traditions believed belonged naturally to human consciousness. As this clarity stabilizes, perception and understanding begin to move together. The mind sees more clearly, and the heart responds with wisdom. It is within this harmony that the deeper meaning of spiritual awakening begins to reveal itself. As awareness continues to deepen, many early spiritual traditions described a gradual transformation in the way human beings interpret the events of life. At the beginning of the journey, the mind tends to see existence as a series of isolated moments. Experiences appear disconnected, and meaning seems difficult to recognize. Yet as perception becomes clearer, this fragmented view slowly begins to change. The teachings attributed to Jesus often encouraged listeners to observe life with a deeper level of attention. Parables, symbolic language, and simple images were frequently used to guide the listener toward a new way of seeing. These stories were never meant to provide only moral instruction. They were invitations to look beyond surface appearances and notice the deeper patterns that quietly shape reality. For those who reflected deeply on these teachings, awakening meant learning to recognize meaning within ordinary experience. The smallest moments could reveal profound insight when approached with attentiveness. A seed growing in silence, a lamp shining in darkness, or a path unfolding step by step all became symbols pointing toward the same principle. Life itself contains the signs of wisdom for those who learn to observe patiently. As the mind becomes less distracted and perception grows more attentive, connections that once seemed invisible begin to appear. Events that previously looked random may reveal subtle patterns. Encounters with others can take on new significance. Even challenges and difficulties begin to carry lessons that were once overlooked. This transformation does not require withdrawing from the world. Instead, it involves learning to encounter life more consciously. The seeker gradually realizes that the deeper meaning of existence is not hidden in distant places. It is present within the very fabric of everyday experience. For the early communities who preserved these teachings, this recognition marked an important stage in the unfolding of awareness. The individual begins to move through life with a different quality of perception. Attention becomes steadier, understanding grows more intuitive, and the quiet wisdom of experience begins to reveal itself more clearly. In this state of awareness, the phrase about having eyes yet not seeing begins to fade. Perception slowly recovers its natural clarity, and the seeker starts to recognize the deeper dimension of reality that had always been present beneath the surface of ordinary life. Throughout the centuries, many seekers have reflected on the symbolic language preserved in the teachings associated with Jesus. Among the most powerful insights contained in these traditions is the idea that awakening does not arrive from outside the human being. Instead, it unfolds gradually as perception becomes more attentive and awareness learns to recognize what has always been present. The phrase about having eyes, yet not seeing, becomes a reminder of how easily the mind can become distracted by its own habits. Thoughts, expectations, and fears can obscure the deeper clarity that naturally belongs to consciousness. Yet the teachings also suggest that this condition is not permanent. When attention becomes quieter and perception begins to open, understanding slowly returns. This process of awakening does not require extraordinary circumstances. It begins with simple shifts in awareness. The individual learns to observe more patiently, to listen more carefully, and to recognize meaning within experiences that once seemed ordinary. Over time, this attentive presence reveals the subtle harmony that underlies existence. Many early spiritual traditions believed that this recognition was the true purpose of wisdom teachings. Sacred words, symbolic stories, and contemplative practices were never meant to impose belief. They were meant to remind the seeker of a deeper capacity already present within the human spirit. When perception becomes receptive and the heart begins to understand, the individual discovers that clarity does not come from forcing insight. It emerges naturally when awareness becomes quiet enough to perceive reality without distortion. In that moment, the seeker realizes that truth has never been distant. It has always been quietly present, waiting to be recognized. Everything begins with Aramaic words. Efath, amas, inananura. A complete guide, correct sound, full meaning. and sacred protocol is now available for those ready to start this journey. The door is open. Check the pinned comment. In the next video, I will reveal another sacred Aramaic word connected to the teachings of Jesus. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and write in the comments what you thought of this content.